Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Lee Hsien Loong. Lee Hsien Loong is a Singaporean politician and the current Prime Minister of Singapore. In 2004, Lee became the nation's third Prime Minister after taking over the leadership of the People's Action Party, when former Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong stepped down from the position. Lee subsequently led his party to victory in the 2006, 2011 and 2015 general elections. He began his current term on 15 January 2016. Lee is the eldest son of Singapore's first Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew. Lee graduated from Trinity College, Cambridge University, as Senior Wrangler in 1974. And later earned a Master of Public Administration at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. From 1971 to 1984, he served in the Singapore Armed Forces where he rose to the rank of Brigadier General. He won his first election for Member of Parliament in 1984, contesting as a member of the People's Action Party. Under Singapore's second Prime Minister, Goh Chok Tong, Lee served as the Minister for Trade and Industry, Minister for Finance, and Deputy Prime Minister. Background: the eldest child of Singapore's first Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew and his wife Kwa Geok Chew. Lee Hsien Loong was born in Singapore on 10 February 1952. His paternal grandmother, Chua Jim Neo, was a Hokkien Nyonya, and his mother has ancestry from Tonggan District, Xiamen, Fukien, China. According to Lee Kuan Yew's biography, the younger Lee had learnt the Jawi script from the age of 5, and has always been interested in the affairs of Singapore, often following his father to the rally grounds since 1963. Style, text align, left notes. Lee Kuan Yew's siblings are. External links. Education. Lee studied at Nanyang Primary School and received his secondary education at Catholic High School, before going on to National Junior College. In 1971, he was awarded a President's Scholarship and Singapore Armed Forces Overseas Scholarship by the Public Service Commission to study mathematics at Trinity College, University of Cambridge. He was Senior Wrangler in 1973, and graduated in 1974, with first-class honours on a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematics and a Diploma in Computer Science with distinction. In 1980, he completed a Master of Public Administration at the John F. Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. Military career. Lee joined the Singapore Armed Forces in 1971, and served as an officer from 1974 to 1984. In 1978, he attended the United States Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, and held various staff and command posts, including the Director of the Joint Operations and Plans Directorate, and Chief of Staff of the General Staff. Lee rose quickly through the ranks in the Singapore Army, becoming the youngest brigadier general in Singaporean history after his promotion in July 1983. Notably, he was put in command of the rescue operations following the Sentosa cable car disaster. Lee left the SAF in 1984 to pursue civilian politics. Early political career. In the 1980s, Lee was regarded as the core member of the next batch of new leaders in the People's Action Party leadership transition that was taking place in the mid-1980s, as Lee Kuan Yew had declared that he would step down as Prime Minister in 1984. Following the 1984 general election, all of the old Central Executive Committee members resigned on 1 January 1985, except for Lee Kuan Yew himself. Lee was first elected Member of Parliament for the Tek-Gi single-member constituency in 1984, at the age of 32. He has since been re-elected 7 times, most recently as an MP for the Angmo-Kio Group Representation constituency in 2015. Following his first election, he was appointed as a Minister of State in the Ministry of Trade and Industry and the Ministry of Defense by his father Lee Kuan Yew, who was the Prime Minister at that time. Later, when he was working under the second Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong, he was appointed the Deputy Prime Minister in 1990 and also served as the Minister for Finance from 2001 to 2007. In 1985, Lee chaired the government's Economic Committee, which recommended changes to established government policies to reduce business costs, foster longer-term growth and revive the Singapore economy, which was experiencing a recession. At the time, the committee's recommendations included reductions in corporate and personal taxes, and the introduction of a consumption tax. In 1986, Lee was appointed the acting Minister for Trade and Industry. In 1987, he became a full member of the Cabinet as the Minister for Trade and Industry and Second Minister for Defense. Lee was the chairman of the PAP Youth Committee, the predecessor to the Young PAP, when it was established in 1986. While he was still a brigadier general, the PAP had been undergoing leadership transition, and many of its key leaders were aging, with younger replacements scarce. PAP branches were urged to recruit 40 to 50 members each. Lee envisioned there would be a lot of young people who were idealistic, patriotic, nationalistic, keen to work for the nation. Lee's goal was to maintain the preeminence of the PAP such that, when the people think about the government of Singapore, if they think about the future of Singapore, then they will think about the PAP. Lee also said that the youth wing would be a channel in which the youth could communicate dissent, in which otherwise they might be tempted to vote for the opposition political parties, and bring the PAP government down. Deputy Prime Minister. On 28 November 1990, Goh Chok Tong took over from Lee Kuan Yew as Singapore's Prime Minister, and Lee Hsien Loong was made one of 2 deputy prime ministers. He also continued to serve as the Minister for Trade and Industry until 1992. In 1992, Lee was diagnosed with lymphoma and underwent a 3-month period of chemotherapy. When his treatment began, he relinquished his position as the Minister for Trade and Industry, though he continued to be a Deputy Prime Minister. His chemotherapy was successful, and his cancer has since gone into remission. Lee was appointed Chairman of the Monetary Authority of Singapore in 1998, and in 2001 he was made the Minister for Finance to ease the growing budget deficit due to falling tax revenues from cuts in corporate and personal income taxes, and other factors such as the Iraq War and SARS outbreak. Lee proposed on 29 August 2003 to raise the GST from 3% to 5%, a change which took place in January 2004. Lee initiated several amendments to render requirements for Singapore citizenship less restrictive, notably for foreign-born children of Singaporean women. The changes were made after repeated pleas from MPs and the Remaking Singapore Committee. In the sphere of domestic politics, Lee played a key role as Deputy Prime Minister. In an interview with the media in 1996, ahead of the 1997 general election, he outlined what the ruling party looked for in its candidates for members of parliament. On the international front, Lee helped build relations with other countries like New Zealand. 2004. In the months leading up to Lee taking over as Singapore's third Prime Minister in 2004, he was already signaling reforms in some key areas, including ceding more space to the private and people sectors of the government's role. He said in a speech, "Nanny should not look after everything all the time." On the 12th of August 2004, Lee succeeded Goh Chok Tong as Prime Minister, and relinquished his chairmanship of the Monetary Authority of Singapore to Goh Chok Tong. Lee was sworn in by Chief Justice Yong Pung How at the Istana. Lee made his maiden National Day rally on the 12th of August 2004. In his speech, Lee initiated the policy of the 5-day work week, a plan that would remove a half-working day on Saturday. The plan took effect on the 1st of January 2005. Lee proposed a 2-month paid maternity leave for mothers of newborn children, and financial incentives to mothers who give birth to a 4th child. These policies were initiated in response to the declining birth rate that Singapore has experienced in recent years. In November 2004, Lee sparked a national debate when he revealed a proposal to build 2 integrated resorts which are holiday resorts with casinos. In April 2005, despite some opposition expressed by the public, Lee announced the decision to approve the proposal. The 2 IRs were built in Marina Bay and Sentosa to limit the negative social impact of casino gambling. Lee suggested that safeguards be implemented, such as prohibiting minors from entering the casinos and charging a $100 entrance fee for Singaporeans and permanent residents or $2,000 for a year-long entrance fee. 2006 General Election. In February 2006, 3 months before the general election, Lee announced in Parliament a $2.6 billion bonus called the Progress Package. The plan was to distribute budget surpluses accumulated from the past few years in the form of cash to all adult Singaporeans, top-ups to the state pension savings for elders, rental and utilities rebates for those living in public housing, educational funds for school children from low-income families, and cash bonuses for low-wage workers above 40 and for those men who have completed national service. The cash bonuses were distributed in early May 2006. Critics, especially members of the opposition, have slammed the Progress Package as a vote-buying exercise for the Singapore parliamentary election held on 6 May 2006. In that election, Lee led the People's Action Party to win 82 of the 84 seats, including 37 walkovers. Lee and his 6-member team won the Ang Mo Kio Group Representation constituency with 96,591 votes out of the total 159,872 votes cast. Most of the opposition Workers' Party's team of 6 were in their 20s, and the constituency was contested for the first time in 15 years. Its decision to contest Ang Mo Kio came as a surprise, as the opposition was expected to stay away from GRCs helmed by heavyweight ministers. But the party said that giving Ang Mo Kio residents a chance to vote was a prime reason for contesting the GRC. Given the inexperience of the WP team and Lee Hsien Loong's position as the Prime Minister, they won a surprisingly strong 49,468 votes. There were also an extremely high percentage of void votes, 13,813. 2010. In May 2010, Lee instituted electoral reforms to the current electoral system by reducing the number of group representation constituencies, increased the number of non-constituency members of parliament to a maximum of 9, and the number of nominated members of parliament permanent also to 9. Also part of the reforms was the legalization of internet campaigning, and mandating a cooling-off day where campaigning is prohibited except for party political broadcasts. 2011. Effective 1 June 2011, Lee was named chairman of the Government of Singapore Investment Corporation, which manages more than $100 billion of assets. He succeeded his father, Lee Kuan Yew, who remained as senior advisor to the fund until his death. 2011 general election. In April 2011, a general election was called for the 7th of May 2011. For the second time, the PAP was not returned to government on nomination day with only one uncontested walkover. In the final results, the PAP saw a 6.46% swing against it from the 2006 elections to 60.14%, its lowest since independence. While the PAP met most expectations to sweep into power and claim over 2/3 of parliamentary seats, it won 81 out of 87 seats, and lost Al Junaid group representation constituency to the Workers' Party, the first time a GRC was won by an opposition party. 2 cabinet ministers, namely Foreign Minister George Yeo and Minister in the Prime Minister's Office Lim Wee Hua, were defeated. Later on, Minister Mentor Lee Kuan Yew and Senior Minister Goh Chok Tong tendered their resignations from the cabinet, stating that they wished to give the Prime Minister a fresh clean slate, informing the government and enable him to have a completely younger team of ministers to connect to and engage with this young generation. Lee and Goh were appointed as senior advisors to the Government of Singapore Investment Corporation and the Monetary Authority of Singapore respectively. Lee was sworn in into a second term on 21 May 2011. His new cabinet included 3 newly appointed ministers. S. Iswaran, formerly Senior Minister of State for Education and for Trade and Industry, was elevated to the cabinet as Minister in the Prime Minister's Office, and Second Minister for Home Affairs and for Trade and Industry. Heng Swee Keat and Chan Chun Sing, both elected to Parliament for the first time, were respectively assigned the posts of Minister for Education and Acting Minister for Community Development, Youth and Sports and Minister of State for the Ministry of Information, Communications and the Arts. Heng was the first new MP directly appointed a full minister since 1984. 2015 general elections. On 27 August 2015, the 2015 general elections for SG50 was called for on the 11th of September 2015 following the passing of his late father Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and Singapore's Golden Jubilee celebrations. The PAP returned to government on nomination day of 8 September 2015. The PAP won 83 out of 89 seats in Parliament, defeating the Workers' Party in opposition. When the new cabinet lineup was formed on 1 October 2015, it was announced that it would have 3 coordinating ministers who are Deputy Prime Ministers Teo Chee Hean and Tharman Shanmugaratnam, together with newly elected Transport Minister Kar Boon Wan and 2 ministries Mo and MTI. With 2 ministers each, Mo was henceforth led by 2 newcomer ministers Mr. Ong Ye Kung and Mr. Ng Chi Meng, who are respectively in charge of higher learning, skills and schools. The MTI was separated from Ministers S. Iswaran and Lim H. Ng Kang, who both co-anchor West Coast GRC. The Community Culture and Youth Ministry has Ms. Grace Fu, who was the first woman in Singapore to serve the full ministerial portfolio. She is currently the first female leader of the House in Parliament. China. Relations with China have improved under Li's administration. Smooth progress has been made in areas of trade, tourism and investment, which is not merely in accordance with the interest of the two countries, but promises to be beneficial to the common development of the region. The China-Singapore Joint Council for Bilateral Cooperation is responsible for promoting Sino-Singaporean cooperation. During his meeting with Vice Premier Wu Yi in September 2005, Li proposed the establishment of a China-ASEAN free trade zone, which would achieve the goal of realizing $50 billion in trade volume before 2010. In doing so, both agreed that relations between China and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations should be elevated. During his 7-day visit to China in late October 2005, the Prime Minister stressed the need of improving bilateral diplomatic relationships between ASEAN and China. Li urged leaders to focus on the next wave of growth in northeastern China, saying, "It is a long-term commitment. There is no place in the world that you can go in, and your money just grows on trees. Not in China." United States. Singapore has generally had a favorable relationship with the United States. The growth of bilateral trade improved commercial and diplomatic ties between the two countries after the implementation of the U.S.-Singapore Free Trade Agreement, and the growth in bilateral trade has been evident since the Free Trade Agreement became effective on 1 January 2004. Li made his inaugural visit to the United States as Prime Minister of Singapore between 6 July and 16 July 2005. Several other ministers, notably Defense Minister Teo Chee-hean and Foreign Minister George Yeo, accompanied Li. On 12 July 2005, then President of the United States George W. Bush and Li signed the Strategic Framework Agreement between the United States of America and the Republic of Singapore for a closer cooperation partnership in defense and security. The agreement was a natural step in the expansion of bilateral ties. President Bush and the then Singaporean Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong had first announced their intention to conclude this agreement in October 2003. The intention of the agreement is to address common threats such as terrorism and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, which called for even closer cooperation between the United States and Singapore. The agreement recognizes Singapore's role as a major security cooperation partner, and will expand the scope of current cooperation in areas such as counter-terrorism, counter-proliferation, joint military exercises and training, policy dialogues, and defense technology. The agreement will further enhance regional stability by supporting the continued security presence of the United States in Southeast Asia. Both Prime Minister Li and United States President George W. Bush agreed that the American presence in Southeast Asia has promoted peace and stability, which are crucial for regional cooperation and economic development. During their meeting, both Bush and Li acknowledged the progress in the war on terror. Li commended Bush's resolute and steadfast stance in the war on terror, and expressed Singapore's continued support in this endeavor. In exchange, Bush commended the professionalism of the Singapore Armed Forces personnel, who have been deployed in support of Iraq operations over the past 2 years, and of the Singapore Police Force, which has provided critically important training. Both Bush and Li also pledged to sustain the close cooperation between the United States and Singapore in key regional and global multilateral institutions. In 2016, Li made his first official visit in 30 years upon the invitation of current President of United States Barack Obama to commemorate 50 years of diplomatic ties with the United States. Controversies. As the eldest son of Singapore's first Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, Lee's career has been shadowed by allegations of nepotism. At the age of 32, he became the youngest brigadier general in Singaporean history, and, from a young age, was widely tipped to be Lee Kuan Yew's successor as Prime Minister. When Lee Kuan Yew stepped down as Prime Minister to make way for his successor, Goh Chok Tong, several critics had seen Goh as a seat warmer, but Lee Kuan Yew said he had disproved that. Responding to the issue of nepotism, Lee said, "And in Singapore people expect that. So if there's any doubt that this is so, and people believe that I'm there because my father fixed it or the whole system is just make-believe, then the system will come down. It's not tenable. If it's true, it better be proven. And I better be kicked out. If it's not true, it better also be proven to be not true, and the matter put to rest." Legal action has been taken in the Singapore courts for defamation against the Financial Times and the New York Times Company. However, in a 2008 report, the International Bar Association Human Rights Institute claimed that the slim likelihood of a successful defense to defamation, combined with high damages awarded in cases involving PAP officials, sheds doubt on the independence of the judiciary, in cases involving PAP litigants or interests. Taiwan. On 10 July 2004, Lee visited Taiwan, causing the displeasure of China. On 28 August 2004, in his very first National Day rally speech, he criticized the Taiwanese leadership and populace of overestimating the support they would receive if they were to declare Taiwan independent. At the same time, he clarified during the rally that his visit to Taiwan in July was to ensure he gathered enough intelligence to make the right decisions. When he took over the baton as Prime Minister, he reiterated his support for the One China policy. Later that year in September, Foreign Minister George Yeo cautioned the United Nations General Assembly about the dangers of letting the cross-strait relationship deteriorate. In response, an enraged Taiwanese Foreign Minister, Mark Chen, called Singapore a mucus country. Chen later made a formal apology. Defamation lawsuit, The New York Times Company. In 2010, Lee, together with the two former prime ministers who preceded him, Lee Kuan Yew and Goh Chok Tong, threatened legal action against the New York Times Company, which owns the International Herald Tribune, regarding an op-ed piece titled "All in the Family" of 15 February 2010 by Philip Bowring, a freelance columnist and former editor of the Far Eastern Economic Review. The International Herald Tribune apologized in March that readers of the article may infer that the younger Lee did not achieve his position through merit. The New York Times Company and Bowring agreed to pay SG $60,000 to Lee, SG $50,000 to Lee Kuan Yew and SG $50,000 to Goh. In addition to legal costs, the case stemmed from a 1994 settlement between the three Singaporean leaders and the paper about an article also by Bowring that referred to dynastic politics in East Asian countries, including Singapore. In that settlement, Bowring agreed not to say or imply that the younger Lee had attained his position through nepotism by his father Lee Kuan Yew. In response, media rights watchdog Reporters Without Borders wrote an open letter to urge Lee and other top officials of the Singapore government to stop taking libel actions against journalists. Integrated resorts. During a parliament session on 18 April 2005, Lee announced the cabinet's decision to develop 2 casinos and associated hotels and malls in Marina South and Sentosa. In an official release, Lee announced in April 2005 the National Council on Problem Gambling was set up in Singapore on 31 August 2005 to address problem gambling. Within the first 3 days of the casino opening at Resorts World Sentosa, 8 people were arrested, amidst a variety of social issues that made the news thereafter. Gamblers seeking help in Singapore increased after the casinos opened, with more than 3,000 Malaysians reportedly gambling in Singapore daily. Between 2010 and 2013, both Resorts World Sentosa and Marina Bay Sands have become the world's most profitable casinos. Dispute over LKY's final will and alleged abuse of power. Lee Hsien Yang and his sister, Lee Wei-ling, are currently embroiled in a dispute with his brother, the Prime Minister of Singapore, over the fate of their late father's property, 38 Oxley Road. He has alleged that the organs of the state have been used against him and his wife, further stating that he feels compelled to leave Singapore as a result of his brother's actions. Lee Hsien Loong expressed his disappointment at the two for publicizing what he believes to be a family dispute. He has also denied the allegation made by them. Personal life. Lee's first wife, a Malaysian-born doctor named Wong Ming Yang, died at the age of 31 on 28 October 1982 of a heart attack, 3 weeks after giving birth to Lee's first son, Lee Yipeng. In 1985, when he was 33, Lee married Ho Ching, a fast-rising civil servant who subsequently became the executive director and chief executive officer of Temasek Holdings. Lee has a daughter, Juchi, and 3 sons, Yipeng, Hongyi and Harry. Ho Ching's eldest son, Lee Hongyi, was the winner of the Lee Kuan Yew Award for Math and Science in 2006. The same year he was commissioned as an officer in the Singapore Armed Forces. Lee was initially diagnosed with lymphoma, for which he underwent chemotherapy for in the early 1990s, then subsequently also underwent a successful robot-assisted keyhole prostatectomy on 15 February 2015 after being diagnosed with prostate cancer. Lee is interested in computer programming and has written a Sudoku solver in C++ in his spare time. Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.